I have gone over 15 of G2's games in depth for me to make this video. So in this video, we are going to be breaking down exactly how G2 plays as a team. Now with Worlds right around the corner, I'm very excited to see how they do, so let's get started. In terms of the way that I'll be categorizing this video, it will start off with the laning phase. Now to me, anything before 14 minutes or when plates are up, I will categorize as laning phase / early game. What I'm going to be looking out for in this part of the game is invades, early ganks, some of the spell usages, and potential solo kills, but that's a lot rarer nowadays. 4 minutes to 7:30 is approximately the timer where people usually go for their first recalls. It's also the timer where teams tend to look for the first Drake. And if anyone lost their flash during the first part of the game, it's also the timer where junglers will tend to look for plays onto the flashless lanes. Now 6:30 is actually the appropriate time to look at if you really want to look at how teams set up for Herald, which is what I will do too. However, I just put in 7:30 for the sake of convenience, because 4 minutes to 6:30 is too short in my opinion. So 7:30 to 14 or 6:30 is when teams will take Herald, and they will also look to use the Herald for either plates or for first turret. So that is essentially the end of the laning phase and the end of the first part of the game. So these are going to be the categories I'm going to rate teams on. The first one is going to be T1 early game aggression, so pre 4 minute invades or being able to get kills or getting flashes from the opponents. Objective control, so this is going to be how teams set up for dragons and heralds. Team fighting, which is mostly going to be in dragons, heralds, and also barons. And the most criminally overused phase, tempo. Now, before we get into all of this, let's first talk about how G2 Esports drafts as a team. Did you know that G2 after patch 13.13 has quite literally a 100% presence of Ivern, where he is either banned or he is picked every single game, either by G2 or by the opponents of G2. He is quite literally 100% presence. Now starting off with our bot lane, we can see that G2 picks bot lane on 4-5 very frequently, unless Kalista or Draven are in the picture. So for example, here Kalista is open, so they picked Kalista on 3, and here Draven is picked on 3 as well, which is also very interesting because this is the first game where Draven is picked on 3. And usually, for example, during the series against Fnatic banned Draven every single game when G2 was on red side in the first phase, for example right here. Whereas in this game, G2 decided to pick Draven on 3, even though they were on blue side, which I found to be quite interesting. But other than that, G2 picks bot lane 4-5 very frequently. These are their last 10 games, and we can see in their last 10 games it happens almost every single game. Here they play Fiddlesticks and Evelynn, and they lost both of the games. It's not that I think that Evelynn and Fiddlesticks are bad champions, I just don't think they fit G2's playstyle. G2 plays very aggressive early games, and these champions don't allow for that. Last but not least, top lane. Now, top lane was quite interesting and is definitely very versatile. Expect to see a lot of Cassants. So Cassant was picked quite a lot during the split for Broken Blade. Expect also to see some Kled sometimes, and also expect to see Swain. Those are the 3 picks which I think are the most interesting. Obviously he has quite a large champion pool and he can play other champions too, but those are the champions that came up in the last 10 games essentially. One very important timer to look out for is the 2 minute 30 to 5 minute mark, because almost every single game in the past 15 minutes, G2 either executes a play or attempts to execute a play at this timer. In this game, for example, they were able to make this bot lane play where Yike jumped over the wall, the Dragon Pit wall, and made this play in bot side. In this game, we see Yike ganking mid lane, and more importantly, getting Humanoid's flash. At a very similar timer here, we see a mid lane play being made onto Niski. At the 2 minute 55 mark, we can see an invade happening onto XL, and we can really see how well they play this. If we look at how slow it's being played, how they wait for Kai'Sa, and how they create time, resulting in a kill. We can also see that Caps ties 1v1 in mid lane. Similar timer again around the 316 to 320 mark, we see a mid lane dive. In this clip, they're 2v2ing the enemies under their turret at the 3-minute mark. And not only this, but they then go on to dive Adam as well. And just to prove how versatile they are, in this clip they invaded top side. So already they've invaded bot side, they've made early plays mid lane, they've made early plays top lane, they've made early plays bot lane, and now they're also showing that they can also invade top side. So when you play against G2, you really have to think in terms of every single threat, and this just proves that G2 is not at all a one-dimensional team when it comes to their early game. They're able to make plays all across the map if they want to. Now G2 Esports excels when they're able to make a play at the 0 to 5 minute mark that sets the foundations for the rest of the game. Now what this means is, for example, let's say that this is G2's triangle pyramid essentially. This is 0 to 5 minutes. They need to make a play from 0 to 5 minutes which sets up for the rest of the game. So for example here, at this mark, they're able to get Abadarge's flash. Later on during this game, we can see that they essentially regank mid lane, and more importantly, they're able to have a lot of control over the area because of the fact that Abadarge has no flash. Now, Caps plays a lot of these champions that have really good setup. For example, he played Ahri in this game, or the Azir versus Syndra in this game, where they were able to get an early play, an early kill plus flash onto the Syndra, which then gave them a lot of control because after Azir hits level 6, Syndra is forced to play under turret or essentially die. Now, even if G2 are unsuccessful, we can see that G2 will almost always attempt to play. For example, in this play, it goes quite wrong for quite a few reasons, but we can see that at least they tried. But we can see how flexible they are. For example, in this game where Yike jumps over the wall, but in top side rather than bot side, fishes for a play in top side, doesn't see it to be possible, and then cancels the play and goes back to his jungle camp. One thing I have to comment on is how many times G2 has gotten out of bad positions based purely off their mechanics. For example, the dodge here onto the W from Razork. This slick dodge by Hans Sama on Razork's Q, which led up to him actually turning this play around and getting a kill for themselves. Or this bizarre chain of events, which went from G2 being in a very bad position where they were going to drop bot waves as they were making a play onto their top lane. This was supposed to be a cross-map play where basically G2 loses out on bot side, but they went out on top side. But it ends up being quite the opposite, where not only did they get a kill onto Pyke, but they outplay the next series of events where they get dove by Maokai and outplay it, almost killing the Xayah in the process. G2 kills Gnar, and not only that, but then Abadarge comes in and they end up killing him too. So they go from a really bad situation in the bot side to a completely detrimental situation for Excel's bot side. G2 has pretty good objective control. Now, if you were to watch just the first part of my video, you might think to yourself, well, that just means that G2 is a one-dimensional team that can only win through superior early game, which cannot be further from the truth. G2 has very good mid game. We're going to get into their team fighting ability later on, but here is a game where they fell quite behind in the early game, but they were able to come back through very simply good objective control. So for example here, they were able to steal Drake, and then not only that, but they were able to secure Herald, get the Drake after that, and then slowly just win through these leads. So as you can see, they got first Drake, second Drake, first Herald, and they're about to secure a second Herald when they're extremely behind. I know you can't see this because of this writing here, but the score is right now 8-3 with a 2k gold deficit, and they're still able to be in the game. So how is G2 able to secure essentially all of the objectives on the map despite them being this behind? Now, they did end up losing the objective here, but they were able to win the fight after it. which resulted in them coming back into this game. Now when it comes to dragons, G2 will only go for Drake when they have really good conditions, or they will go for a steal, but they don't really care that much about it. In every single clip that I've watched where they do go for Drake, they only go for it again when they have good conditions. Now, this isn't to say that Drake for them is not important, not at all, but rather they're not going to flip the game over it. Every single time I've seen them go for Drakes was when they had good conditions to go for the Drake, and it's very rare for them to try to essentially force it. However, Heralds, on the other hand, are a must when it comes to G2. In the last 10 games, they have contested every single Herald, no matter what. Even when they were losing, they would try to contest Heralds. In this clip, for example, you can see that they choose Heralds over Drake. Now, once again, it's very easy to take Drakes once you have a lead, and G2 manages usually to get leads in the first 5 minutes of the game. So therefore, they have quite a large percentage in terms of actually taking first Drakes. But what I'm saying is that for them, if their bot side is losing and they lose Drake, it is not the end of the world. Heralds are a no-no when it comes to G2. Do not mess with G2's Heralds. They will almost always fight Herald fights. Now, even if they lose, it doesn't matter. They will almost always be on Herald at the Herald timer. It doesn't matter who they have to sacrifice as a pawn to get a Herald. They're getting that Herald no matter what. Now, one way to view G2 Esports as a team is that the first 5 minutes for them is the building block for them to set up the correct foundations for them to be able to take Herald. And that is it. Now, of course, I'm exaggerating a bit here, but G2 really cares about Heralds, and I'm very excited to see what happens when they do play against the Chinese teams who also have a very similar emphasis on making sure that they get Heralds too. So we can definitely expect to see a bloodbath in Worlds when the 8 to 10 minute timer comes along. Even in this game where they're playing against a Rumble top lane, one of the strongest level 7 to 8 champions in the game, they still contested it. And as you guys can see, these fights are sometimes very chaotic, and they have lost these Herald fights before, but in the past 10 games they've contested every single Herald, and in the majority of almost all of their games, Herald is quite a big emphasis. Now this leads on to our next point. If Herald is so important for G2, how do they use their Herald? Now, Herald usage from G2 is very potent, and I'm gonna start off with the least effective thing that they do with Herald to the most effective. The least that they will do with Herald is they will usually chip down mid turret if there's no play available, and this will give gold obviously to Caps, and will also help them chip down a mid turret so they can set up to take first turret later on in the game. One thing to note is that they will almost always try to first set up a play before they place the Herald. So for example, here they set up a play here, and then they placed Herald here. You can't really see it, but it's happening here. They're actually placing the Herald after they created a play first. Here we see something very similar happen. They try to create a play, and then they are able to successfully kill BDS's mid laner before they place down the Herald. Here we can see that they attempt to make a play where Mickey X hovers around mid lane, but they were not able to find anything, so instead they just take some plates and chip down on the mid lane turret instead. G2 is very dynamic with their Herald usage. They use it for top, mid, and bot lane. Now, for example, here they try to set up a play first before they place the Herald. Doesn't really go very well, but they still end up using Herald and they back off. But you can really see the mentality behind G2 when it comes to Herald usages, where they try their best to make a play first before they place the Herald down to increase the effectiveness of the Herald. For example, here they were able to make this disgusting play onto the bot lane, and then they place Herald down and effectively take the entire turret, which is one of the most ideal ways to use Herald, to essentially take the entire turret with it. However, by far their most effective usages of Herald have been in cross-map plays. So for example here, another example of Hansama being very slick with his movements and surviving in situations where in my opinion he should not survive, but they make this play onto the bot lane of G2, and G2 responds with Herald, taking the entire turret in the process, plus 625 gold, plus the plates, plus the wave. making this play incredibly good for G2. Another example is here when Mad decides to dive the bot lane of G2, Hansama ends up surviving and they kill Mickey X, but in response G2 uses Herald topside, and not only that, but they end up denying the waves of the enemy top laner as well. So we can really see the mentality behind G2 when it comes to Herald usages. They usually want to create a play first before they drop the Herald down to optimize the usage of their Herald, or they will use it for a cross map, or if they can't really find anything, they'll just use it to chip down mid tower usually. The second that the game timer hits 20 minutes, G2 immediately starts playing onto Baron. Now I'm going to go over a few different examples. How does G2 play when they're ahead, and how do they play when they're slightly even? And I was trying to find games where they were behind at 20 minutes, and apart from the losses that they had, I couldn't really find any. Now the second that they hit 20 minutes and they're ahead, for example in this clip, you can see they don't really care about topside. Top wave, Caps was running towards top lane here to catch top wave, and then he must have gotten called in to walk through river by Mickey X, and then they just create this play. And this is what happens quite a lot of the time when it comes to G2 and Baron. G2 will take Baron at least from 1 minute to 4 minutes right after it spawns. They'll immediately start searching. Here's another clip where they were quite ahead, and as you can see, they take blue buff, Yike immediately runs towards Baron, Caps recalls, TPs in, and they get the mid wave push. As you can see right here, mid lane is pushed, and they immediately run very deep into their jungle and just literally clad ult and look for a fight. They find the fight, they get the kills, and then they get the Baron. This clip was quite interesting because what happened was Broken Blade literally went in 1 versus 3, ulties Razork over the wall, TP comes in, Hansama ulties over, but what they end up doing after is they reset, they come back, and then they decide, well, you know what, Razork has no flash, let's just start the Baron. Because Razork has no flash, he has no way to really enter the Baron pit without essentially dying, and they're able to secure the Baron. So here is their second way of getting Barons, and their second way is by using Broken Blade to split push. They group up essentially as 4. If Caps gets waves, he's just there to catch them, and what happens is the way that you deal with split pushers is either by starting Barons or by forcing a fight. In this case, Mad decides to start up the Baron, they come in, TP in, kill them all, and then secure the Baron for themselves. Here is another example of them using their top laner Broken Blade to split push to create a fight. So here, because Broken Blade is split pushing on and threatening tier 2 turret and eventually ends up taking it, what happens is Adam decides to group in. They decide to force a fight whilst Broken Blade is split pushing, since he has no TP, but then again he is playing Kled. And they're able to create this outplay where they try to engage onto Hansama, Caps engages onto their backline, and Mickey X goes forwards rather than backwards trying to peel for Hansama. He allows Yike to peel for Hansama, and they create this fight, and they end up killing them all, and they secure the Baron right after. Here is a game where they're actually behind, where what happens is Mickey X starts, and it might look like Mad is the one that's engaging this, but it is in fact G2. Mickey X walks up on purpose here, Yike takes the portal behind them, and they create this fight. Now this fight ends up going quite decently for G2, but this doesn't result in Baron, but instead what happens is after this fight they reset, but as you guys can see they're already looking for the Baron. Right at the 20-minute mark they immediately start searching for it. They go mid lane again, Broken Blade has TP, goes bot side, Caps groups with his team, they're playing a 4-1 here. What happens is, as you can see, Hansama pushes the mid wave. They have mid prio now as this wave is entering the Mad Lions side of the map. Caps then with this push decides to push top side, and then they use these 2 pushes to secure vision. They secure vision, completely sweep, go for mid prio again, get the mid lane prio, and then they use the mid prio again to sweep for vision. Now G2 is in a position based on this where they have vision control, and Mad is the team which has to face check into G2, and because of this they're now, as you can see, looking to fight. So they're walking up looking to fight, playing quite aggressively, and this I found to be really interesting. They decided to start the Baron even though Hans Sama was catching the wave. Hans Sama then starts moving in with Mickey X, kind of with him a bit, and they start this fight. So they engage this fight, they win it, and then they end up securing the Baron after it. This, in my opinion, was an extremely good play by G2. This again is a game where the game is quite even. Caps pushes in this top wave and is now resetting to go and catch this bot lane wave that Nuke has pushed in. And they know, G2 knows that Adam has no TP. So what happens is that Broken Blade is sitting here on close to this pink ward, spots out Crowny. They know that Adam is going for the top wave right now. So within this very tight timer where Nuke has now reset, and since Nuke has reset, G2 is obviously assuming that Tristana is possibly on the way mid lane. They find this pick onto Crowny in that very, very tight timer where Adam was running back to mid lane. So because of that, they're able to find this advantageous fight, and they end up starting Baron very shortly after. So as you guys can see, G2 is a team which is able to find these opportunities, find these picks at very, very tight timers. And the second that Baron spawns, that becomes their main priority, and they're quite good at setting up. And they're very aggressive. The second that they get an advantage in terms of vision, they will immediately look to create a fight. After patch 13.11, G2 has lost 5 games. Now, a few of those games were quite interesting to say the least. 2 of them were on niche picks, quote unquote niche picks on jungle, which I don't think are bad champions, but I just don't think they fit G2's playstyle very well. If you guys have watched the entire duration of this video, then you will know that G2 has won most of their games through very aggressive plays during the early game, and also through being able to pull the trigger immediately whenever they see an opportunity. Now, Fiddlesticks and Evelyn are champions that require for you to full clear early game, so it's very hard to make things happen. And of course, in this game, Caps was not available, and his evil brother Craps took the mouse and keyboard away from him. As we can see, there were 2 very interesting plays that our friend here, Craps, made in the mid lane. So we can't, of course, blame the pick here for sure. And this game definitely was 100% winnable for sure, obviously, but I just don't think it still suits them. It doesn't enable their strengths. Now, I do believe that they picked these champions as kind of like a test. They probably played them a bit in scrims and wanted to see if they could play with this playstyle or not, to expand their playstyles. It's always good when you're a flexible team that can play different playstyles, but I just don't think it fits their team very well. Now, once again, I'm not blaming the draft as in the champions. I'm just saying that I think that these champions do not currently suit G2 with the way that they win and lose their games. It might fit another team, and again, it's not a bad draft, so to say. I just think that G2 has a very clear playstyle. They have very clear strengths and weaknesses, and I think they should just stick to that rather than playing different champions. Now, once again, it's very clear to me that this was more of a test run before Worlds, so I don't think we're going to be seeing these champions once Worlds comes in. So much went wrong in this game, from the early game with Caps dying here and losing his flash, to the failed turret dive that later on happened, to also over here, to also Hans Sama dying to a gank in the early game. Already you have 2 core lanes playing off the back foot, not very good. But so many things went wrong. For example, in this play here, Caps is zoned off by Abidagi because he's a level ahead, and he ends up not being able to join this fight, and then this fight goes wrong. Soon after that, the same thing happens where right now Caps is slightly zoned off and a bit late to this fight, and G2 contests it anyways. It really does seem like G2 is not used to having their mid laner fall behind, so they're playing as if their mid laner is absolutely even and he was first on the play, when in fact he was stuck mid lane. I couldn't really see what was happening, whether he was zoned off or he just couldn't join or what happened exactly, but again, reoccurring theme 3 times in a row where Caps was unable to join a fight, so the fight goes wrong. Then you have this game here, which was quite sad for sure, which was basically just an unsuccessful fight. What happened was that Patrick essentially flanked solo Giga Chad Patrick going in here. The entire team of G2 focuses in on Patrick. They get zoned, so now they're stuck in a situation where they were quite indecisive. They weren't sure if they want to go on Patrick here or if they wanted to commit here. Obviously, in hindsight, the correct choice was to just go all in on XL and understand that Patrick cannot join this fight anyways. But again, this is in hindsight. And this ends up resulting in a very, very split fight where G2 is completely unsure of what to do. They end up losing this fight. Patrick then smurfs it, and then they lose Baron and ultimately end up losing the game. So this was just quite an unfortunate game where they kind of got outplayed by themselves. G2 really is a team which gives and takes. Even in the games that they lost due to over aggression. For example, Caps trying to turret dive in mid lane and then dying, Yike and his team invading and then it going wrong. Even when G2 loses their games, they're losing in a way where they're being over aggressive and they're not, rather than them being invaded and them being in the back foot. I am definitely not the type of person who blames drafts. I really do think that most games are winnable and that games are lost very rarely with one individual play. They're usually an accumulation of a lot of small plays. But as you guys can see here, Yone is a champion that plays split push a lot of the time. There's very few teams that Yone can group well into, especially not this team. This team is horrendously bad for G2 to play into as Yone, as all of the gold is on Yone rather. And the same thing goes for Sivir. I think Sivir is not a champion that highlights Hans Sommer's strengths and weaknesses. Hans Sommer is a very mechanically gifted player who is very good in these like high intense moments, and Sivir is not a champion that can actually highlight this. Sivir is more of a supportive type of champion which wave clears a lot, and of course in the right team comp can be played to a very high degree of mechanical play. But in this game, once again, she cannot do that either. So for example, if you look at fights like this and you pay attention to Hans Sommer, there is not much he can really do in this position. For example, we look at here where he becomes isolated on his own. He kind of just gets hit by Maokai E, walks up, can't really do much, and just dies without him being able to even do anything. And again, I am not one to blame draft at all, and this game certainly was winnable. It would take a long time for us to review it. I did review it in my previous videos, so if you want to check out this game specifically, do check out my previous videos. But I just really do think that G2 can draft in a way that seriously does highlight their strengths rather than their weaknesses. And it's quite interesting to see in a lot of this game, you see that Broken Blade is essentially playing in the position that Caps usually would be in. So usually if you look at the past games that we spoke about, you will see me talking about 4-1 and that the G2 plays 4-1. And in this game, you see that Broken Blade is playing in the position that Caps would usually play in, and Caps is playing in the position that Broken Blade would usually play in. So the roles kind of have changed. So why does G2 lose their games? Now, so it's almost impossible to give one individual reason why a team loses. Usually it's a lot of small issues within a team and sometimes rather major issues. But to sum it up, from what I've seen, one key thing that happens is over aggression. As we saw in the past few games, they were a bit over aggressive in certain plays, and then in another game they lost because of one bad team fight and of course a few other plays, but that was the game that essentially opened up the can of worms. And then you have other games where I just think that they draft in a way that makes them play absolutely the opposite of what they usually, of the way that they usually win their games with. Now, to sum it up, G2 is a team which is very adaptive, very aggressive. They are usually the aggressors most of the time. They're the ones setting up the plays. They're the ones who are either invading or turret diving or looking for these team fights. They're a team that emphasizes Herald a lot, and then they make, they usually get a big chunk of their gold lead off using Herald appropriately. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they do against the Chinese teams, especially, who are also very aggressive too. Now, one concern I do have is their bot lane. Even though I think their bot lane is the best bot lane in EU by far, 4 out of 10 of the games that they played in the past 10 games, they were successfully ganked. And even though they escaped in 2 of them, just purely through their mechanics, I think against better teams such as the top LCK and top LPL teams, they actually would have died in those scenarios. But I really do see it as a game of confidence. I think if G2 stick to their guns, then I actually am pretty optimistic about them. I just hope that they're able to play confidently on stage when it comes to these LCK, LPL teams. I of course still have to do an in-depth review of JDG, so I can't really talk much yet about what I think the result will be in terms of when they play against JDG. I will make a final video in the end, after I'm finished with JDG and probably one LCK team too. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, who knows, maybe this year will be different. G2 seems to have their clear style and their clear strengths, and I think if they continue playing on them, then they might actually have a good result this year. Other than that, guys, see you next time. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys enjoy this video.